Well, welcome everybody.
Hey everyone.
We are live and I think we have audio and everything. If you're just tuning in, today we're going to be talking about anger.
And I am angry that I was late. I literally walked into the room about 7 seconds ago. He made me tea. I'm just angry that it's the wrong kind of tea. No.
Gosh.
I don't do anger very well.
You're
we'll
really
get
bad
to
at
that.
anger. We're going to be talking about anger. Is it good? Is it evil?
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about the sermon. We're going to be talking about all sorts of nonsense today. Who knows what else
know.
is in
Yeah,
it? It's like I'm supposed to be doing these like the beginning of the show. You kind of say what's coming. So like if people are interested, the problem is we don't know.
We don't know. Nonsense coming. Our planning time for this was severely restricted by crazy busy schedules. I just got to go have breakfast with a guy called Jeff Brodsky. And if you've never met Jeff, he is a character that you should just investigate online. He runs this great charity, Joy International. He's been walking around barefooted, for I think it's the last 10 years or something. So in the middle of winter, we meeting at Bagel Deli and he strolls in barefooted and proud.
Such a great guy.
And yet does this incredible work all over the world, helping free people from sex trafficking, all of these different crazy things that go on in this crazy world of ours. And so it's always incredible to have breakfast with someone like that. And he's just, his life looks so different than yours. He's like, where were you this week? He's like, I'm in Alaska tomorrow. And I was in Cambodia 3 days ago. And I'm like, wait, can you even get from Cambodia to Alaska in 3 days?
So crazy. Yeah, it has been a little bit busy. And so not that we prepare a ton for these shows anyway.
But maybe more so than this.
But maybe a little bit more
Yeah.
than
And you've
this.
got Easter coming up, and we've got staff appreciation for those of you that are South people.
Volunteer appreciation.
Volunteer appreciation. Can we do a staff appreciation?
We do a whole event where we just appreciate ourselves.
It's like the Oscars.
And then you just have to sit there and watch us talk about how awesome we think
In
we
some
are.
ways, the Oscars are simply Hollywood applauds itself. Load of rich people sitting around saying how amazing they are and how they've contributed to the world. We're going to start doing that for staff.
Yeah.
No, volunteer appreciation is this fun, chaotic event where we gather for an evening on Sunday and we celebrate the fact that South is really like, its volunteers are what make it thrive. It's not us as staff, like we're a part of it, but the volunteers definitely are special here. You guys, some of you that are listening, you are special.
Absolutely. So, and yeah, we're trying to make it a special event.
There will be singing, potentially by me.
Be afraid.
Yeah. If you wanted to know what anger felt like. So yeah, come to that.
So when was the last time you were really angry?
Oh man.
Oh, you told one story. Do you have another one? That's a rough question to start with.
Yeah, it's a good, but it's a very pointy question because it almost like pushes us straight away to the question of, well, what do you mean by angry? When was the last time like I exploded with rage? I actually don't remember. Like
other than the story you told on Sunday.
Yeah. And I was pretty mad, to be fair, but
Apple, if you're watching this live stream, what?
Yeah, Apple,
first of all,
what's the deal, man?
We're such a big channel. You really should pay. I tried to keep a straight face.
Yeah.
There's like 0 people watching right now.
That's fine.
They'll watch later.
The numbers will come in later. Okay. Yeah, I was so mad at Apple. That is true. But almost in this humorous kind of, it doesn't really matter way. I mean, without being cavalier about church funds. It wasn't even my iPad I was trying to get replaced. It was an iPad that I have for work. Like it didn't have quite the personal touch that maybe I implied. Like it wasn't like my $1,000, what's happened to it? So I think I'm trying to think through like what makes me angry. And then like there's this question of like the good anger versus the bad anger. So again, like sitting with Jeff this morning, Jeff runs this charity and we actually talked about like what makes him good at what he does is his anger. Like he is angry about the fact that there is this suffering going on, that there are these young girls and young boys who are trafficked off to different places, that are being abused. And he's like, I am angry about that. So to him, like, and I was all for it. Like he can be a little bit prickly when it comes to like talking to you about funding, talking to you about involvement, talking about, he's like, what do I have to say to make you think this is valuable? Do I have to tell you some of these stories about things that I've heard about? Like, because the things that I carry with me, I am angry about them. So you should be a part of fixing them too. And almost everyone I've known who runs a great charity, like when you talk to them, you're like, you actually think this is the only thing that matters, don't you? Like you like food banks to you are like, why? Like things that like Easter egg hunts for kids, why? Like, why are you even doing church on Sunday? Like, this is the thing. Get involved in this fight. If you're not involved in this fight, you're wasting your time. And it's not like they actually, when you probe them, think that everybody should think like that. But that just is what makes it possible.
Yeah,
for them to do what they do.
Kind of the gift or the calling sort of necessitates that level of intensity.
Yeah.
So that starts to answer a question. And we're diving right in.
Yeah, we are.
We made comments about bad tea that I made for you again. That I made for you. I mean, like, again. Went out of my way, just skipped other meetings, and it's okay.
We're getting to sadness this week. We can process your sadness.
No. But yeah, so one of the questions I was going to ask, but you're already starting to answer is anger ever okay? Is it all, or is it always evil? Yeah,
that started to come out of that conversation with Jeff today. Like as he started to articulate, this is my need and this is why. You can feel the anger building in you. You're like towards the situation. So you come away from a conversation with someone who's that passionate about something, saying, "Yeah, no, I am angry about that." Like I'm allowed to live in this world where I kind of pretend it's not happening most of the time. And I kind of operate in a world where like me trying to engage nice, comfortable, unchurched families with Jesus doesn't seem quite as pressing as his big thing. So you come away with that sense of like, no, I'm angry right now. So that when you ask when was the last time I was angry, like 2 hours ago, sitting down to breakfast.
Yeah.
But then when was I angry for less noble reasons? And I think that's become a bit of an evangelical like pat answer when we talk about anger. We're like, yeah, but Jesus was angry. Remember the temple thing? And you kind of like, yeah, that one time.
Well, speaking of which, we actually had a question about this 2 or 3 weeks ago when we were doing the show. I don't remember why it popped up in that particular show. I'd have to go back and watch. But one of our listeners actually asked, well, what about, like, I think we were talking about the graciousness of God and his willingness to sort of enter in and engage and all of this stuff that his anger towards sin is actually a sadness, all this stuff like that. I think that was maybe the context of what we were talking about. And someone reached out and said, well, wait a second. What about his anger in the temple and what's going on there? And why is that okay? And is it okay? And on and on and on.
Yeah.
So I don't, I'd have to go back and find the exact question.
Well, I think it was maybe after Kevin's sermon, right? Because Kevin talked about like
it was the week before.
People come to him and say, when he talks about shame, they're like, what about justice? What about like, God wants you to stop sinning. God wants you. And he's like, okay, yeah, almost. That can be a bit of a straw man argument, It's the same conversation that we have around grace. Well, you can't be too gracious. God has standards, God has justice that he cares about. And that's true. But if that becomes like the reason that grace doesn't matter, then it's a bad argument, because no, very clearly across Jesus' language, across Paul's language, grace does matter. God is incredibly gracious.
Yeah. So what's your answer? What's going on with that situation? Oh, by the way, shout out, Brenna's watching us. She said she was just talking about Jeff Brodsky yesterday.
No way.
So, hey, how's it going? Thanks for tuning in. And if you have questions, feel free to shoot them in there. We don't do the whole live engagement thing very well, but so I had one chance. So
way to go. Look at that.
And you got it, Brenna. So yeah, what's going on with Jesus, and what is that anger, and why is that okay? Versus so many other expressions of anger that aren't.
Yeah. And again, his anger is, it seems like, linked there to injustice. It's linked to the world is broken. And his frustration comes out with people who are being mistreated. The temple system is abusing people. It is taking advantage of those that are weakest. So is it anger? Yes, but it's almost like this defensive anger. It's almost like Jesus, with all of his strength, stands in front of those that are unable to defend themselves and says, no, they have me on their side. There's almost this beautiful, it's almost like standing up to the bully type anger.
Totally. Is that all? Can you think of another moment in scripture where it's a different kind of anger? Or is it always that kind of from God?
So it seems like, to me, most of the time, the anger is around contributing to a broken world, onto a broken system. Sounds like you can think of a different example, though.
No. I'm genuinely asking. I'm culling my brain through different stories. I do think that there's multiple stories throughout the scriptures that sound like maybe they're a different kind of anger. But I suspect if you study them closely, what's actually going on is what you're saying. And it's more of a defensive. Well, I think a great illustration to this could come right from your message on Sunday. So maybe we'll get to it in a moment, because I want to get to some stuff that you talked about on Sunday and ask you about this, and like help encourage you to like maybe reiterate some of this. You talked about sort of the three approaches to anger. Like, what do we do with our anger? When we get angry, what do we do with them? And then you talked about Walter Brueggemann. There's a little video that's floating around with the daily devotional and stuff of Walter talking about imprecatory prayers and stuff. So can you reiterate that story about anger? The siblings?
3 pathways.
Yeah, of 3 pathways. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, like, I think depending on your personality, you tend to one of 2 pathways. So you tend to either be a venting person, or you tend to be a stuff it down deep person. I'm going to control it by holding it within me. And one seems really noble, and yet I'm not sure it's actually is helpful maybe. So by nature, like, yes, you can vent, you can blow off your anger. And the story that we talked about around that was Samson's story. We talked about how, he vents his rage. His wife is given to another man. He thinks the marriage is sealed, and then suddenly he goes back and she's like, no, I gave it to your friend. Again, weird cultural difference for us. That doesn't happen today.
I thought that was a really, if you didn't get a chance to listen to the sermon, I think you should go back and listen to it, because I think that your whole treatment and a telling of the Samson story, I guess I've read Samson's story many, many times, and I didn't really maybe tune into the reality that maybe that story is showing us what it looks like when anger just goes out of control. And
it's complicated because it's mixed with all this language of the Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson. Like, what does that mean? Like, I mean,
is the Spirit confirming this anger?
Yeah. Or is it like, no, the gifts of calling of God are without repentance. He has these gifts. It's like, it's different language from a different day, but definitely written within it for whatever reason. The author comes back to, I'm only doing to them what they did to me.
gosh.
We're only doing to Samson what Samson did to us, and it goes back and forth. And the crazy part is you see that language all over the world. Like there is a Russian narrative right now about Ukraine that is like somewhere this is justice. It doesn't have to be true. It's just in our belief. Like you look at like the Middle East area, constant back and forth. So you'll have a narrative that says, no, Israel, the land was theirs. And a whole group of people in Palestine would say, no, the land was ours. And a group of people in Israel would say, no, but the land was ours first. And then a group of people would say, no, but the land was ours before that. And then the group of people in Israel would say, yeah, but God gave us that land. And a whole other group of people are like, can he even do that? Is that even allowed? Like, you're telling us your God gave you the land? Like, we're supposed to just go along with that? There's all of these things all over the world that are like time and time again build on this, like, this sense of revenge and anger that just vents and says, no, I'm going to deal with that. And so like when you just stuff it deep inside, which is pathway 2, it can feel like you've stopped it, except maybe you haven't, because maybe you're just allowing yourself to build and it's building there. And eventually it will blow. It's not that you can hold it forever. It's not that you can not vent forever. It will come out somewhere at someone. But in the meantime, you can almost convince yourself, no, I've dealt with it.
Yeah, and I think I'm a stuffer.
Yeah, me too.
I'm the guy that like just says, yeah, ignore it. And I even put a better label on it. I'm not stuffing my anger. I'm showing grace towards the offender.
Yeah.
And I'm just gonna like ignore this issue. I'm going to extend them the benefit of the doubt. So like, it sounds really good when I stuff, but if you ask my loved ones, and maybe if you stuff your anger deep down, you might think you're being successful at it. But if you ask your loved ones, they're like, oh no, you're terrible at that.
Yeah,
like it leaks out of you.
Does.
And interestingly, it oftentimes leaks out on someone that didn't defend you.
Totally. Oh, wow.
Like
yeah.
So someone hurts you at work.
Sorry.
Yeah. No. Let's say like someone makes a comment to you at work. I bet there's a ton of marriages out there that have suffered from this situation.
Yeah.
Someone says something to you at work. It hurts you or you're angry at them. You stuff it down because you need an income and you don't want to like get fired. You go home, that anger leaks out on your spouse.
Yeah.
And you become a grouchy, bitter, whatever kind of person, and it wrecks your marriage.
Yeah.
Because someone at work hurt you, you wreck your marriage.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's a thing that's a story that happens all over the place. So stuffing is
and can simply be because the other person has even less control over it than you do. Like you can theoretically, you can get mad enough about the situation that you can step up and say, no, I'm not going to put up with this anymore. In actual fact, like when you think of Christmas Carol, there's the moment like where Bob Cratchit, the famous poor clerk that works for the famous Ebenezer Scrooge, he has this moment where he goes home on Christmas Day and he says to his wife over Christmas dinner, let's have a toast to the founder of the feast, to Ebenezer Scrooge. And his wife's like, what?
No way.
Like, you know, that guy's a jerk. That guy's the guy that makes you miserable, the guy that makes you work too much, that doesn't pay us enough. We're in poverty because of this guy. And Bob's like, to the founder of the feast. Like that, the rage is in his wife, not in him.
But ironically, if you watch that play, who has more power, like human power in that moment? Bob Cratchit or Ebenezer Scrooge?
Yeah.
Like everyone's rooting for Bob Cratchit in that moment.
Absolutely.
Because there's something about like returning goodness for evil that makes you way more powerful than the offender.
Yeah, there's a humanity to that that's incredible. And almost like a godlikeness to that is incredible. Like when we are giving good for bad, who are we being like?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So
there's the two. So one pathway you talked about, which is like lash out in anger, which is Samson's story, and it's just like actually it's a story of Samson. It's the story of the political system in many countries. one party versus the other. They lash out. Well, they did it first, and then oh no, but I did it. And like there's this political battle that's taking place all over the world in different countries in our country, people on different sides of the aisle, and on and on and on. Or there's the stuff it down, and we've talked about how that's unsuccessful. What's the third?
So the third is I think that avenue that says it allows you to approach the God of the universe and say, this is a thing that I'm holding. Are you willing to engage in that with me? And usually finding that he is. So it's, again, that seems to be where these imprecatory psalms come from. They come from a place of, no, I need to vent. When the writer of Psalm 137 verse 9 says, happy are those who take your little ones and dash them against the rocks. Are we to believe that if he could see that happen, he would rejoice? Are we to believe that he would do that if he had an opportunity? Maybe, but probably more likely, this is him venting very real human emotion. And it's certainly not, when it's there in the Bible, God's endorsement of that action, which is the danger. That brings us into the whole minefield of hermeneutics. Like, how do you take something like the Bible with however many different authors, 66 different books, and say this is God's word? Now, yes, but what do you mean by that? Like, that gets very complex, because if you flip over to Job chapter whatever, and you've got Job's three comforters, his friends that come alongside him in his trauma, Job goes through all this terrible stuff, and they sit with him, and then they tell him all these different things, and at the end of that, God says, oh, they've all spoken wrongly. So then you have to go back and read everything they said through the lens of, this is wrong, not right.
Totally.
It's the word of God, but it's specifically not accurate.
Yeah. So, which is why I would consider scripture reading advanced reading.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it's not supposed to be an easy answer in every, you open a book, you read a story, and you're like, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do in my life now.
Yeah.
No, it's actually supposed to haunt you, maybe.
Yes.
And make you linger and make you meditate and make you question and wrestle and cry out to God, like, what is up with this? And all of these things. And then it's doing its job. But if you go to every story and say, I'm supposed to do what the protagonist in this story does. You are in
grab your jawbone, baby. Yeah. We're going to war.
You're in a world of hurt. So, and I think we intuitively know that in some stories, but then there's other stories you're like, am I supposed to act like David right now?
Yeah.
And the Psalms is one of those places where the psalmist writes these majestic things, and then suddenly these really terrifying things. You're like, am I supposed to pray like that?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like you see those stories play out in everyday life where someone says something about their desire for vengeance. They express some anger, and you could see someone listening and acting out on it for them, and the other person finding out and being like, "Dude, I was just mad. I didn't mean it. We use that language all the time. I didn't really mean it. I was mad at the time. I needed some space to vent." And it seems like God provides this safe space for us to vent. That the explosion there can't hurt anyone. The wrath there can't hurt anyone. God is able to take that, and he's able to just take it. Hey,
yeah. So you described it. You took a jawbone, which you, by the way,
buffalo jawbone.
Buffalo jawbone. Yeah. You got that on the internet.
That, you can get anything on Amazon, it seems.
That's awesome. Anyways, you said take this jawbone, which is a representation of lashing out in anger, and you said you give it to God. Well, so that's the prayer. That's the imprecatory prayer. That's the angry prayer.
Well, so to me, the honesty part comes first. The first part is honesty. That's the prayer. That's the yelling. That's the shouting. And I think there's almost this moment, it seems, where we've yelled and we've shouted a lot, and it seems like God says something almost like, "Are you done now? I've listened." He says that very thing to Job. He's like, "Have you finished?" And then slowly, whether through his direct conversation, through our just release of emotions, there's maybe the possibility of some humility. Maybe there's that moment where you're like, okay, maybe I don't know completely. Maybe I don't know the history of this person that hurt me and just how screwed up they are by family situation, by shame-based culture that that Kevin talked through the other week. Like maybe Ebenezer Scrooge had some stuff done to him that I don't know about.
Which you start to even see in the play,
you start
right?
to like pick out some of his bad story, like some of his like heartbreak, some of how he was treated as a kid, all of those different things. Somewhere that like starts to just like say, okay, maybe I am not the best person to judge. Because I think that's where God leads us. Like, no, I am the one that can judge completely. Vengeance is mine. Yeah. Justice is mine. Will it come? Yes. Will it come when you want it to? Will it look like you want it to? Maybe not, but it will happen. And
and God's the only one that has the wisdom to weigh those, what's actually justice. Because if like, imagine the complexity of actually reaching perfect justice in every situation. Because if God's factoring in, I want you to destroy my enemy. Yeah. And then God hears that enemy saying, I want you to destroy the one that wounded me. Because I'm only lashing out at so-and-so because I was wounded.
Yeah.
And so destroy them. And then God hears the cry of that one that says, no, I was wounded by my parent who said such and such to me, or I was abused. And then God hears the cries of the broken world. And then he's able to actually factor that in. And so like, absolutely. I love this idea, like the age old philosophical problem of evil, right? We say, well, what if God is good and perfectly good, all knowing and loving, how can evil exist in the world? Well, okay. All right. So if you want God to deal with evil in the world, what if he starts with you?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're like, well, no. I want him to start with other people.
Yeah.
But that's not how justice works.
There's that complexity, right? Like a visual that I quite often come back to when I'm looking for this complexity is I'll look at like debt in the world. Like there's all these, you look at like who owes what to who. You're like, we owe $15 trillion to China or whatever. And you're like, oh wait, but China owes that money to them. Oh wait, that country also owes money to China, but they owe money to us as well. And then and it's like, can we just let it all like disappear off the balance books? Can we just cut it and just say, okay, we all owe stuff to each other. Let's
Sounds
just
like
call
the
it
year of Jubilee.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Do you got anyone out there know what the year of Jubilee is?
It is like that's where we're going really, because eventually it becomes like, well, no, because they owe more than I do, and they owe less to that person than we owe to, and it becomes this like graceless situation. And the year of Jubilee wasn't about that. It wasn't about how much you owed. It was just simply, no, we're calling this now. We're done with this system for this year. And did they start it again? Yes.
Yes.
But it was this beautiful picture. I would suggest like Jesus' system of grace that he talks through in regards to forgiveness is a permanent Jubilee. It's like taking that and it's living that system permanently. Now, of course, we'll never do that with world debt because, well, we just won't. But
and I don't know if there's any record of the people of Israel
actually
ever
doing Jubilee.
Actually doing Jubilee. It's sort of the heart of God on display, like laying it out as a system. But in our brokenness, we're too tied to the systems of the empire and systems of the world to actually relinquish these kinds of debts. But imprecatory psalms, or praying and venting your honest heart to God, and then trusting his wisdom, his grace, and his justice. Like he does bring justice, even if it's just on the cross. That's probably the best step we can take.
And so to go back to Samson with his, like that last piece was, it's honesty, it's humility, and then it's handing over the jawbone before it's covered with other people's blood.
Totally.
Now, the weird thing about the Samson story, like I'm retconning his story a little bit, because in a weird way, like he kills everyone and then sings a song. Like he's like, with a donkey's jawbone, I made donkeys out of them. Ha 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 ha.
He used a different word than just donkeys too.
He did, yeah. And so there's this moment like where he's looking around and there's piles of blood and he's like, ha 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 ha, victory. And yeah, I wonder whether that's realistic in the story. Like, I wonder if it's possible after the moment of rage has subsided to not look around and be like, man, I just killed 1,000 people. And I would work through that with students that went into like the Marine Corps. I remember one student calling me like right as I was going to bed one night, and he'd obviously been drinking, and he just rambled for a little while, and then like out of nowhere he just said, "Alex, can you give me something from the Bible that says God can forgive me for taking another human's life?" And you're like, wow. Oh man, Nate, like, where have you been? What's been going on? Where's your journey been? Because you don't know. And even like back when he was a sniper, he would say like, I'm in all the places that you're not supposed to be. Like I'm all over the place. Like you kind of like almost no one, it seems, at least at first, does the kind of thing Samson does and then sings great songs about it.
Yeah.
There's usually somewhere some sense of like, oh, this wasn't how it was supposed to be.
There's an inevitable shattering of the soul that takes place when anger is expressed to that level.
Yeah, and so when we vent at people, when we explode, when we cut someone down, when we say the thing that we've been planning to say for ages, and we just like, no, we know this is going to cut them to the core. I'm going to win the argument with this word. It seems inevitably there's some sense of like, what did I do?
Yeah. Well, I have more questions and maybe we'll get to them, but we actually have some live questions. So I feel like
we should ask.
We should set a precedent here and encourage this. So we actually have a couple different things going on here.
Maybe more people will watch live instead of on record.
Questions, which actually I care about. No, I'm just joking. So Jan is watching. She's kind of become one of our big fans and stuff. She talks to us every weekend. I'm a big fan. Who isn't?
Yeah.
Who isn't Jan Costas' big fan? Anyway. She said, how do you fend off anger that you can see coming at you? How do you let go of the hurt that still exists even after an apology? So this is less, how do we deal with our own anger? And the question starts to turn, well, okay, what if I'm not even angry? Someone's attacking me in anger. And then how do we let go? And I'm intrigued,
and if she's watching, I would love a clarification on that question, because I'm intrigued as to when she says the hurt that still exists. Oh, actually, no. She says, how do you let go? So, like, it's not about them still being angry in a flip of the situation.
Totally.
It's about that, like, no, that sense of like, no, I'm still, this hasn't done it for me.
Yeah, I think that there's an interesting, I think the scriptures answer this question in a very counterintuitive way. And a very difficult, maybe hard to hear answer to this question. It's basically to pray for your enemies. It's that idea, which is exactly what Jesus models. Because here's the deal. If someone attacks you in anger, and this is the story of Samson in a nutshell, like, Samson does something, or actually the Philistines do something to Samson. He rises up and does something to them. They rise up, do something to him, and it's this cyclical sort of situation. And who comes out looking like they've risen above this? No one. So when someone evil attacks you and then you reciprocate, what's that make you? It makes you them. So the only way to not be them is to actually break the cycle by doing something so counterintuitive, which is to do unto others as you would want them to do to you, which is, I know how ridiculously difficult that is to say. And it's something that I don't often do, but there's been moments where it's crazy how powerful that can be.
Yeah.
I was just listening to a sermon series on this exact subject, and I was like, wow, that if you want the sermon series, it's Andy Stanley preached a sermon series. I think this title of the series is like how to deal with mean people, or something like mean people and how to deal with them.
Wow.
And and
that's what I love about Andy Stanley, the practicalness of, like, this is what we're talking about right now. We're talking about the felt need of mean people.
Yeah. And he basically addresses your question exactly. And this is the conclusion he comes to, and he tells multiple stories about it. So he's going to do a way better job.
I love our counterintuitive church that's like, you should listen to this sermon series. from another church.
Totally. Until Alex gets a chance to preach on it, and then listen to him.
Coming next week, mean people.
A series coming to you.
So I think I sympathize with where that question comes from. Like, I was Elon Musk, who I think is a character we both find intriguing. And I think during this whole last couple of years, I've both come to like him more and like him less in a weird way. Like, there's times where I'm like, I love that you're asking these questions. And there's times where I'm like, okay, you got a bit weird during COVID and everything. But he actually had a thing the other day where he talked about the mechanism in our brain that is fight or flight. And I can't remember the exact term he used. But he said, no, this thing is so strong. It's what makes the idea of turn the other cheek so incredible. Like, it's almost biologically impossible to switch this thing off. Someone slaps you, you want to slap them back, or you want to run away. But to stand and not slap them back, it's just counterintuitive to every part of our physiology.
Totally.
And so that's what Jesus says. Like, he's like, no, in that moment, you don't respond in the same way. And I often used to read him on the cross saying, Father, forgive them, as him like just saying, yeah, I feel like forgiving. And I feel like everything's fine. Mm-hmm. But in actual fact, as I got older, I'm like, no, maybe this is a prayer of choice. And the feelings aren't related to that. Like, I think we want to feel good towards them, and the feelings maybe are in this way some of the last things to develop. It's an intentional action, and it's hard to hear in some ways. Like, one of the things, the theological questions I asked at one point was, is God asking us to do something that he doesn't do? There is, like, when we talk in church, we talk about coming to God and asking for forgiveness. He almost seems to ask us to go a step further and choose to forgive even when we haven't been asked for forgiveness. Like, he almost seems to ask us at times to take the first step, which is then a choice, not a feeling. It's a decision to say, no, I'm going to do this, which isn't easy. I'm trying to read the follow-up question while I'm still talking.
She said, the hurt that's still there, even though someone has said, I'm sorry, but the pain of what they've called you is still there.
So good, Jen. Wow.
You can pull out the nail, but the hole is still there. And that's actually an interesting language that you use there, Jan, because the nail's there. Like, even talks about in Revelation, how you'll still see the scars of the crucifixion. And that's exactly what Jesus does. Like, in Romans 5, it says that while we were enemies, Christ died for us. It's not like, while we turned around and there he's like, all right, now I see you're serious, so now I'm going to die for your sin. No, like, while we're running away and attacking him, that's the moment when he died. And that's the model of this ludicrous kind of grace and mercy in response to anger. And yes, the scars still don't go away. Not even on Jesus.
Know. And that's like that. I mean, all that can mean is that, like, we have to allow ourselves time to heal. We have to give ourselves that soul care and recognize that that's not going to be like a feeling that just appears overnight.
Totally.
And that it gives us this caution. I used to do this illustration with students around words, and Jan specifically talks about words which are so creative in us. Like, someone says something, you can't take that back. You can't unhear it. I used to do this illustration when I used to work with students where I would give them this big, like, piece of pottery.
I think you told this story
last
week.
Yeah, maybe I did. Yeah, maybe I did. Was it in the, what did we talk about?
Tell it anyway, because I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I've heard you tell it, but I can't remember it was this setting.
Maybe it was in one of our other meetings, but I would let them smash this pot and then make them try and put it back together. Like, they get the joy of doing that thing of, like, the sledgehammer comes up and boom, this thing explodes into pieces. And then they have to do the hard work that if I let them go all the way to completion, I mean, it's basically an impossible task, but it's certainly an hours and hours of work task. And I would always say, like, that's the word. The word can destroy. And to put it back together is like, it's like gossip. Like a great illustration of gossip is like what it is to like, you take a feather pillow and you slash it with a knife and you like let it go everywhere. And the thing that you say is the knife strike, but the result is almost like you can't stop it once it's going. Like the feathers are now everywhere.
You're not going to get those feathers back.
You can't. Yeah.
And that's the brokenness of the world. And yeah, I mean, I guess the fuller answer is like, yeah, it's a long journey. It may involve some counseling. It may involve, but the scars, like even if you were to assemble the pot again, and there's actually this beautiful art. I can't remember what the name of it.
Kintsugi.
Wow. Like, oh, this is so fun.
So I used it as a sermon illustration, and it was one of those sad moments where I genuinely believed I'd come up with something super original and poignant. And then like over the course of the next 5 years, you find like 50 other pastors have used this as illustrations.
Yeah. So
like
this art form is basically a shattered like china dish or something, and then they bring those pieces back together and mend it with gold.
They mix gold dust into a lacquer, and they use that. And so the beautiful image of it is this: it's the plate that is rebuilt is more valuable than the plate that was broken, and more beautiful than the plate that was broken, and more unique than the plate that was broken. So yeah, I was like, oh man, this is going to be amazing. And it was a great illustration, but I was like, it's not as original as I thought.
Yeah. But I think that the point is, if you retaliate, you become the very thing that hurt you to them. If you, like, the only way to not become, like, if you, like this illustration is actually from the sermon series I was telling you about. If you have a mean person do something to you, and then you just start to dream about ways you can commit vengeance, you become the mean person.
Yeah.
And so they actually have crazy more power over your life because they're taking who you are and they're shifting it to be closer to who they are.
And I think what's super hard about Jan, and I don't know the specific circumstances, of course, but sometimes when something's said to us, even after the apology has been made, like the thing that keeps coming back to us is, did they really mean it? Even though they said sorry, like, is the thing, when they said that, was it true for them? Do they really think that about me? And then the question that often follows on from that, is it true about me? So when you meet someone who's been told that they're ugly, then the question is like, do they really think I'm ugly? Even though they said, sorry, I was just mad, I was just joking. And then the question becomes, why am I really? When someone calls you stupid, the question becomes like, do they really think that? Maybe I am. And there's all these psychological stories of people who spend years in counseling because they believe that that they are stupid people because a parent called them stupid when they were a kid. And it just stuck.
Totally.
So that's some of the hard part.
Let's say they did mean it.
Yeah.
But so someone says something to you when you're in elementary school, and it changes the trajectory of your entire life.
Yeah.
And then years later they apologize.
Yeah.
The trajectory of your life doesn't change.
It doesn't. No. And it might be a step towards healing. Yes. But you missed out on this opportunity because of the fear that you had, because of the comment they made. And like, yeah, so go back and listen to the shame talk, because that's actually part of how shame weasels its way into our lives. We do actually have another question here, and I want to wrap up the show fairly soon, but let's make sure. You don't want to go into hour 2 again?
No. Over on YouTube, Brenna asks, could there be a third type? I vent, but I'm also working. Sorry, I have to talk into a mic and get closer to the screen so I can read it. But I'm also working on handing it over instead of dragging it with me. Yeah. So I think, in one sense, I think we already answered that partially. There is 3 types that we talked about. There's like a vent, there's a suppress, and then there's the handing over type. I don't know if that answers your question, Brenna. That is the third type.
But it feels like almost like in this conversation, it's almost like in a heartbreaking way, it feels like you're having the worst of both situations because you're like, no, I vented. The venting didn't do what I wanted to do. So now I'm going to stuff it deep and just hold it inside. And then I'm trying to hand it out like it's like I've been through. But I wonder how many people feel like they go through multiple stages. Like I have noticed the number of times I'm annoyed about something and I'll go to someone. And this usually happens, I think, with Laura and I. Like, because she will say like, well, I'm sorry for how that affected you. And I'm like, but I said something and now I want to say more though. Like, I don't want the apology right now. I want to say everything that I'm feeling. And quite often, like, we'll say something. And let me just clarify, like, Laura has much more right usually to get mad at me than I would at her. But like, just in those moments from my personal perspective, there are those moments where I'm like, I feel like I said something and the sorry came and the sorry's almost cut me off in my tracks. So now like, I feel like I'm going to have to stuff it deep. And again, that's coming from someone who's not good at expressing their needs and their annoyance in a situation or any of those things without becoming like just weirdly like grumpy. So I think that like I can sympathize with that. Like that's almost like a mixture of all three of them.
And I think another element. So this is a lesson I've observed my wife does really well at this. And it's part of that same prayer exercise is one, it's like handing the weapon of justice. In your case, the way you described it was this jawbone, giving it to God and saying, you deal with them. So that's one sort of like, okay, I trust it in your hands. But then also there is something cathartic and necessary, which is what you're alluding at, of like getting it all out and expressing it. And my wife does a really good job of praying those kind of prayers and then reminding herself in her journal, God knows. God sees. And I'm vented to him pages after pages of hurt or whatever it may be. And then she goes back through and says, he knows about this issue that I vented about, this thing. There's probably no one in the world who's willing to sit here and hear the entire expanse of all of the emotions I'm feeling, except for God hears it all. And he even knows the nuances that I haven't even picked up on in my own life.
And one of the
there's something powerful about being able to do that. A
fascinating story that ties in so much of this outside of the Bible is that the Alexander Dumas, the Count of Monte Cristo. It's a young guy, 19 years old, on the cusp of everything he wants. He's going to be a captain of a ship. He's finally going to be fairly affluent. He has this beautiful fiancée he's going to marry. Everything is coming together for him. He's just joyous. And then it's all snatched away, and he spends the next 14 years in prison. And he writes on the wall, God will give me justice. And it begins as like scratchings on the wall. And by the time he's been through 14 years, it's like these deeply, it's deep like gashes in the wall. God will give me justice. God will give me justice. God will give me justice. And then the story goes on that he escapes, finds fabulous wealth that someone has shared the location of with him in prison, and takes out his revenge in all of these incredible creative ways. Lives out like the Psalms, if you could control it. He lives out what it is to make the people suffer till the last moment and then to have them killed or to whatever. And then like at the end, he's like, this was all a mistake. Like this was a bad move. This has not got me where I wanted to go. It is that, like you're right, it's that picture of like, he kept writing, God will give me justice, and yet the moment it was possible for him to take justice into his own hands, he did it. And it wasn't worth it.
Yeah.
So I think for us, like there is a surrender of justice that we have to ask God to help us to come to mean. Because I think sometimes for us, our prayer of God knows and I'm going to hand justice over to him is just based on the fact that we can't get our own justice.
Yeah. And you, in order to give justice to God, you have to believe that he actually will bring it. And that takes an amount of trust, knowing God's character. And we tend to want justice a little bit more violently than God would bring it about.
And a bit sooner.
And all of those things. But if you start to get to the place where you trust the personality, the character of God, and then you start to see the ways that he disseminates justice or in the world, and you're like, oh yeah, like he will bring justice. And maybe it's difficult. Maybe for some of you, it's hard to think of the cross as truly justice against the enemy. So maybe that's part of the reason why it's so hard to relinquish. It doesn't feel like justice if Jesus dies for that thing. But there are times when he steps in and brings justice more directly. Anyway, that's opening another Pandora's box.
Man, we could open many Pandora's boxes from.
Yeah, this is a heavy subject and hard to.
And this week we get to talk about sadness on Sunday, which has interrelation. Just even looking at Cain's story that we did briefly on Sunday. Yeah. Are you angry? Are you sad? Are you both? Do you know? And I think that's some of our language at times, and there's pure sadness and there's grief, and how do they interact with each other? There's depression. How does that interact? I mean, there's so many questions around sadness.
Totally. Maybe I'll leave you all with one quick thought, sort of a pastoral thought for more like an immediate, what do I do with my feelings of anger? Because we've talked about this midweek, anger is probably one of the more palpable emotions because it has such a physiological response. For most of us, we have a clenching of fists. There's a feeling that washes over your physical body when you feel angry. But Alex also talked about this in the sermon. Anger is usually a byproduct emotion. There's usually sadness underneath it, which we're going to talk about this coming week.
Or fear
There's
underneath
fear underneath it. There's shame underneath it. The story of Joseph's brothers who attack him, it's envy and jealousy underneath it. And so anger, that physiological response, is like a warning bell that there's a different emotion. So maybe think about that for a moment. For me, I grit my teeth. When I'm angry, I do this thing and I want to just punch something. So maybe take a moment, process how your body responds to anger, and then say, by the way, that's not what I'm actually feeling.
I think that's so I always like to give an actual illustration of that really quick. I remember this time I was turned down for a job and I was super angry about it. And then when I looked underneath the surface, what was really the problem? Was it anger? Yes, but it was actually fear. It was actually fear that what if they're right about me? And what about if all the things that I think I would like to do, I won't get to do because nobody else sees in me what I think I see in me?
Yeah, see, that's so perceptive.
And so actually to go back to whatever those emotions are and say, what is underneath and what is the fear? And then what do the people that matter most to me say about me? What does God say about me? And ultimately, the things that I was worried I wouldn't get to do, was I attaching too much to them in the first place? Was I creating values that didn't actually matter? Those are all extra questions that go beyond that.
Yeah, so anger is actually an invitation.
It is an invitation to ask a load of questions.
So when that physiological response washes over you, let it be this physical invitation to a deeper conversation with God. What's up with this?
And by the time you've asked all those questions, your enemy will be so far away. Yeah. You won't be able to do anything anyway.
Yeah, but I think if you don't take it that way and you just leave it at that surface emotion, there's something underneath that. And that's what a counselor can help you get to. If this is a journey you're not, but a deeper, more mature human being, as they get better at it and more acquainted with their emotional world, takes an emotion like anger and they do go below the surface and they ask the question no, I'm actually afraid that maybe my identity isn't what I thought it was. And then you can actually address that one.
And if you are
what's God think about me? What do other people think about me? Are they right or are they wrong? But if it's just anger, you're I have three options. I can vent it out. I can suppress it. I can give it to God.
Yeah.
That's all I got. But if you get down below, there's way more access to healing underneath the surface.
Absolutely. And if you're part of South, we have loads of people in the church community that are gifted counselors in different areas
Totally.
that we would love to help connect you with if that's a journey you want to go on.
Yeah.
Love it.
Awesome. Well, if this was helpful to you, please like, share. If we appreciate if you share the show with folks and all of that. And I've said all the obligatory YouTube,
Sign up, subscribe. Like.
Yeah.
We should say that at the start before we've rambled for so long that people are like, do you know what? I only had 20 minutes and it's now like an hour.
Totally. I was going to try and make this one less than 45 minutes, but it was just...
But I talk too much.
No, well, but look, you got a comment. Alex, exactly.
Thanks, Jan.
You nailed it. I don't know which thing you said that nailed it, but something Alex said was exactly right.
And I am now going to go and learn the lyrics to my song for volunteer appreciation.
Ooh, sneak preview.
What will that
Alex
be?
is gonna
Who
be
knows?
Singing. All right. It's great to see you guys. I'm going to ramble for a second while I find how to shut off the stream.
You should just see your whole Siri do this thing.
I should. I actually closed the window. So I'm going to have to open the window.
I could do some stand up. I could sing a song. I could tell a joke.
Tell a joke.
La, la, la.
Live. Upcoming, current.
Wait, did it cut off because it's an hour?
Yes.
How long ago did it cut off?